Did you know that for centuries, many historians claimed Africa had no history before European arrival? That's a lie we are about to shatter. Welcome to Myth vs. Fact, where we dissect historical narratives to reveal the truth. Today, we are diving deep into African history, exposing the myths that have obscured its vibrant past. For too long, the narrative surrounding Africa has been shaped by racist ideologies and colonial agendas designed to justify exploitation and oppression. One of the most insidious of this was the Hamitic Hypothesis. Popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this theory posited that any significant advancements in Africa, from the pyramids of Egypt to the impressive structures of Great Zimbabwe, were the result of light-skinned invaders from North Africa or even the Caucasus. The implication was clear: sub-Saharan Africans were incapable of creating civilization on their own. The Hamitic Hypothesis conveniently ignored the complex societies and sophisticated civilizations that flourished across the continent for centuries. But how could such a blatant distortion of history take hold? It served a purpose. By denying Africans their own history, colonial powers could more easily justify their presence and exploitation of the continent's resources. After all, if Africans had no history of their own, they were seen as needing guidance and civilization from Europe. This narrative was pervasive, influencing textbooks, academic research, and popular culture. It shaped the way generations understood Africa and its place in the world. But the truth is far more complex and compelling. For centuries, African societies have preserved their history through oral traditions, passed down from generation to generation by griots and other storytellers. These oral accounts contain detailed records of dynasties, wars, migrations, and cultural practices. But for a long time, these traditions were dismissed by European historians as unreliable and unscientific. That began to change in 1961 with the publication of Jan van Sine's groundbreaking book, Oral Tradition. Van Sine, a Belgian historian, demonstrated the reliability and value of oral sources for reconstructing African history. His work revolutionized the field and paved the way for a more nuanced and accurate understanding of Africa's past. Van Sine's work helped to validate the rich tapestry of African history that had been ignored or dismissed for so long. This opened the door for historians to reconstruct pre-colonial African narratives, shedding light on the achievements and innovations of African societies. The dismissal of African capabilities wasn't limited to ancient history. Even statistical data was manipulated to support racist ideologies. In the 1840 U.S. Census, the physician-statistician Edward Jarvis analyzed data that claimed higher rates of mental illness among freed Northern blacks compared to enslaved Southern blacks. This flawed analysis was seized upon by pro-slavery advocates to argue that slavery was actually beneficial to enslaved people. Jarvis himself later admitted the flaws in his analysis in 1844, but the damage was done. The lie had been spread, and it continued to be used to justify the institution of slavery. The transatlantic slave trade, which spanned from the 16th to the 19th centuries, was a brutal and dehumanizing system that forcibly displaced millions of Africans. Europeans purchased slaves from African intermediaries and resold them into perpetual chattel slavery in the Americas. This system was fundamentally different from forms of slavery that existed in Africa at the time. In many pre-colonial African societies, prisoners of war might be enslaved, but their status was often temporary. They could gain freedom, integrate into the community, or be ransomed back to their families. This was in stark contrast to the lifelong, hereditary enslavement imposed by Europeans in the New World. The myth of Africa's lack of history also ignores the existence of powerful and sophisticated empires that flourished long before. European contact. The Mali Empire, which reached its peak under Mansa Musa in the 14th century, was a center of trade, learning, and culture. Great Zimbabwe, with its impressive stone structures, was a testament to the ingenuity and engineering skills of its builders. And the Kingdom of Aksum, in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, was a major trading power with its own written language and coinage. These empires, and many others, demonstrate the advanced governance, trade, and architecture that existed in Africa prior to European colonization. The legacy of these historical distortions continues to affect Africa today. Underdevelopment narratives often blame African backwardness rather than the exploitative policies of colonial powers. The Congo Free State, under the brutal rule of King Leopold II of Belgium, is a prime example of how colonial extraction devastated African societies. It is estimated that 10 million people died as a result of Leopold's policies. In the wake of independence, African scholars and activists have worked to reclaim their history and challenge the dominant narratives. They have drawn on oral traditions, archaeological discoveries, and archival research to paint a more accurate picture of Africa's past. However, some post-colonial narratives have also fallen into the trap of creating countermyths. For example, some have claimed that homosexuality is un-African or that Africans are inherently communal rather than individualistic. These claims, while intended to restore dignity and pride, lack historical evidence and can be harmful in their own right. It's important to remember that Africa is a diverse continent with a complex and multifaceted history. There is no single, monolithic African identity or experience. To truly understand Africa's past, we must be willing to challenge our assumptions, question the narratives we have been taught, and embrace the richness and complexity of African history. The rediscovery and celebration of African history have played a crucial role in 20th and 21st century dignity movements, helping to combat racism and promote Pan-African unity. However, it is equally important to acknowledge the complexities and contradictions within African history, including the role of Africans in the slave trade. Pre-colonial forms of slavery existed in Africa, but they were often different from the chattel slavery imposed by Europeans. Africans participated in the transatlantic slave trade, often under duress from European firearms and economic incentives. These are difficult truths to confront, but they are essential for a complete and honest understanding of the past. In some cases, Afrocentric narratives have overcorrected, claiming that Africans originated all civilizations or that ancient Greece was derived from Egypt. While these claims are intended to counter racism, they lack historical evidence and can be seen as denigrating other cultures. The key controversy surrounding African history is the long-held belief that Africa had no history versus the overwhelming evidence of advanced civilizations and complex societies. This controversy was fueled by colonial biases and a dismissal of oral traditions as unreliable sources. The suppression of oral traditions continued until Vansina's groundbreaking work in 1961, which challenged the dominant Eurocentric narrative. In education, countries like South Africa and Nigeria are incorporating Vansina-inspired oral histories into their curricula, challenging colonial textbooks that ignored significant events such as the Zulu Mfikeng Wars. Modern activism, including YouTube documentaries, amplifies Africa as paradise narratives to combat racism, influencing Pan-African movements and demands for reparations. However, it is important to avoid romanticizing the past and to acknowledge the challenges facing Africa today. The legacies of the slave trade continue to fuel contemporary human trafficking in West Africa, with thousands of detections annually. Understanding the historical context of these issues is crucial for addressing them effectively. The truth about African history is not always easy to uncover. It requires critical thinking, a willingness to challenge assumptions, and a commitment to seeking out diverse perspectives. But the effort is worth it. By understanding the true history of Africa, we can dismantle the racist myths that have been used to justify oppression and build a more just and equitable world. As we move forward, let us remember the words of the great African writer Chinua Achebe, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." It's time for the lions to tell their story. Ancient map of Africa, pre-colonial era, showing trade routes and kingdoms, detailed and ornate, 8K.